Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining our breakout session on how to navigate the lack of racial justice at work. And the goal is to discuss and find ways to reach a racially just workplace. There are so many ongoing great sessions right now. We hope you'll be able to watch the recordings for other breakout sessions as well. For those who don't know me, my name is Paloma Cariello. I am an infectious disease physician here at the University of Utah, and I also serve as the Associate Dean for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the School of Medicine. It is my pleasure to be here today with two wonderful panelists, Dr. José Rodríguez and Dr. Jeanette Ducut-Sigala. Dr. Rodríguez is a family medicine physician at University of Utah. He obtained his medical degree from Weill Cornell, followed by residency at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He currently serves as Associate Vice President for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in Health Sciences. He's a professor in the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine and Associate Medical Director at the Redwood Health Center. While at the University of Utah, Dr. Rodríguez has taken a strong role in advancing the institutional goals for health equity, diversity, and inclusion. Within his department, he has served on the Diversity Committee, as well as various recruitment committees supporting focused recruitments of underrepresented ethnic and racial minority faculty and residents. He has represented the university with presentations at national conferences on our work and his research on diversity initiatives. Dr. Jeanette Ducut-Sigala immigrated to the US at a very young age, and she grew up in a culturally and socioeconomic diverse Southern California. She received her bachelor's degree at California State University and PhD in biological sciences at the University of California, San Diego, followed by postdoctoral training at Stanford University. Here at the University of Utah, Dr. Ducut-Sigala currently serves as the Science, Diversity, and Inclusion Program Manager for the Senior Vice President for Health Sciences Research Unit. Also, as the Administrator and Advisor for the University of Utah Untitled Chapter, or Society for the Advancement of Chicanos, Latinos, and Health and Native American Science. Her leadership and collaborative efforts have helped grow and evolve the diversity of bioscience training programs since 2017 to reflect the current national and demographics. It is her passion to foster and support the potential and success of the next generation of innovative scientists and scientific leaders, and influence the evolution of an environment and a culture where true diversity, universal inclusion, and equitable infrastructure is the default and not the exception. Thank you both for joining us today. So let's talk racial justice in the workplace and start with a very basic definition question. Why is it important to have equity in the workplace rather than equality?
I'll go ahead and start off this. So yes, there is a difference between having equity and reaching equality. Let's start with equity. Not every, we all come from different backgrounds and different levels of resources in our backgrounds. Some of us came in we have access to education. A lot of us access. Some of us didn't. Some of us came from different socioeconomic backgrounds. Some of us came from a cultural background where, one thing was emphasized and another wasn't. So, if we come to, for example, now all of a sudden, our life journeys bring us to the scientific enterprise or the clinical enterprise, brings us here, right? And we say, I want to, something in us during our journey said, I want to do science. But the thing is, how do I get there? No one before me ever really, even had a notion that what is a PhD? They know clinicians. Like my family immigrated here, and they know clinicians. They know because we see them and interact with them all the time, and they're so important. But my mother is a nurse, and she, at one point, with her education and with her work background, she asked me when I was ready in my second year of PhD work. She's like, when are you going to medical school? I'm like, oh my God, Mom, don't you get it by now? And I was shocked, right? Because I was already well in my training program. And finally I said to her, I said, look, Mom, where do you think the medicines come from? You think they just kind of pop up on the pharmaceutical shelf? and all these devices and everything. It's like a lot of people, try to figure out how to come up with these medicines and so forth. So I think this is a little vignette just to say that all of us come from different perspectives with different levels of resources and opportunities, and some have more than others. It just is. And so what I think equity is that if there are deficiencies in one's background, you know what, can we help you basically give you the resources to allow you then to really evolve, to grow. And if we basically say, no, everyone is here and everyone starts on the same, we're not on the same platform when we start. It took a lot for us to get there, but at the same time, as diverse our backgrounds is, it's going to be diverse things that are needed to actually get to the point we want to get to. And I think, we need to recognize that first, that, there are gaps, and how do we fill them? And to start the conversation to say, well, tell me about yourself. How did you get here? And I think you'll start to realize and appreciate, wow, you did a lot to get here. You're very resilient, but yet there are still some things that maybe, you could probably appreciate having a little bit more access to in order to really fortify some of the things that will help you get to where you want to go. So having access, being aware, listening and allowing yourself to be aware where the gaps are, and then saying, you know what, let's work together. Everyone will have gaps, everyone will have deficiencies, everyone will stress out. And so the strengths of one group can actually help fortify the weaknesses in another, and vice versa. So that's why I think equity is. How do we support one another to get to where we want to go eventually? Because in our training programs, there are gaps. There are very definite gaps. We crunch the numbers, and the well-represented groups in our biosciences program, PhD programs, they're graduating at a rate of close to 80% historically, getting their PhDs. And the underrepresented groups are graduating at a rate of 50%. So there are huge gaps. So the equity part is going to see, how do we provide what we need to make sure that there is equity amongst all the groups.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dr. Ducut. Equity simply is giving people what they need, and equality is giving everybody the same. And because we don't all have the same opportunities, having the same, support from institutions won't get us to the place we need to be. And I think it's another important thing to recognize that as we become more equitable, it makes us smarter. It gives us the opportunity to make better decisions. It also makes us more competitive in a global workplace. And so all of those things, and the most important thing, I'm a family doc, is it makes us give better care to our patients. And so this is why I feel like it's a very important part of what we do.
Thank you both so much. Can you talk a bit about interventions that are effective in creating a racially just workplace?
So there's two things here, right? We're talking about racial justice, and I think a lot of the interventions that we have aren't about racial justice as much as they are about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, now theoretically they should be the same, right? And so there's some interventions that actually do work to make this happen. And I think that one of them is building coalitions. So having people who are responsible for this work in strong alliances with people who aren't responsible for this work by title, but who take it on. Let's say, so in a department of neurobiology, for example, you might have a titled diversity officer, but you will have 5 or 7 faculty members and staff members who take on this mission to make the place a more equitable place. Now, if we're talking specifically about racial justice, that really requires the adoption of an anti-racist identity. And as much as we as an institution want to say that we are an anti-racist institution, that's not a true statement until our policies reflect that. And our policies really are what gets us the compositional diversity that we have. So if we see a homogeneous group of students, then we have to look at our admissions policy because that's what's producing it. If we have a homogeneous group of faculty members, we got to look at our hiring policies and change that. And I think Dr. Ducut-Sigala really has been working in a fantastic example of how you can really transform a program from being completely homogeneous to being one of the most diverse programs in, definitely the most diverse programs in health sciences and likely in the nation.
Thank you, Jose. You know, I just want to basically expand with some specific vignettes on what basically Jose really hit the nail on the head on. So interventions, okay, your voice, you're not, I'm at a point where I can't stand and be complicit with the status quo anymore. There's obviously, you know, cracks, leaks, poison in the system. Okay, now, you know, and I think this year in particular has really, I think, compelled many of us to just stop and think. Okay, and then stop and think, talk, hopefully, you know, be open to more of a relationship to get to know one another for better and for worse. And it's really uncomfortable and it's hard, but that's growth. Okay, first of all. Now, how do we transform that into something that's really actionable? And in what we do personally and what we do in our work, how much influence we have in our work, whether you're, you know, at the top, in the middle, or, you know, a student or a staff person, how do we be part of the intervention that needs to get done? And I'm a strong believer of not having things going from top down, but also the power from bottom up. Right? And when the bottom up and the top down, okay, they all have good intentions, but they're not working together. But when they actually meet in the middle, and they talk, that's when change can happen, because you're now learning from all sides of the perspective. We talk a lot about top down, that's fine. And we get the messages from leadership, but you know what? The hard work is going to be really, really done. The day in, day out work will be done from the bottom up. We do have guidance, and I think we need one another. And we have to, more importantly, bridge that well enough. And that's where some of the lessons I've learned from what I've been helping out with the biosciences program is what really, really worked to get us where we are today. And where we are today is, I'll just tell you, in our training programs, at the bioscience PhD programs, the goal was to say, can we have a training cohort, these are PhD students, be representative of the broad talent pool that the United States has to offer? That is our ultimate goal. Right. So then you go and look at the data. It's like, okay, what did all the surveys have done and so forth? Okay, here's our measure goal. About 25% of bachelors from the biomedical biological sciences are from underrepresented groups that are defined today by the NIH and NSF. All right, so that's our goal. And then you look at the other demographics. So that's something we wanted to get to. But the thing is, how do we get there? Because the year before that, it was 0% underrepresented students coming into our programs, at least the biosciences. So the thing is this, right? How can the bottom, and this is what I've been thinking a lot about, how do we get here, right? And the thing is, it went from the bottom, the people from the bottom up, working with the people from the top down, and us meeting together in the middle to really say, let's try some new things. This hasn't worked before. And the inclusion of groups like, for example, SACNAS, who, you know, we had a small smidgen of diversity, people from multicultural groups. Well, let's include them. Inclusion excellence is a main ingredient. We include them because they care about these things just as much as the leadership wants to basically get there as well. So we brought the bottom up and the top down together to work together. And so we tried new things, tried best practices, tried new things that are new to Utah, and we invested in building relationships. And I think what Jose was talking about, building relationships, I think is really the secret spice in all this. the building relationships between different communities, because people have well intentions, but the thing is, we started really talking and working together. And people, the intervention is all of us have a capacity to be natural leaders. And then sometimes we also step back and be good followers. The thing is, sometimes we act from the bottom up, and sometimes we act from the top down. And it's not either or. You have to be flexible and malleable to know, where you can be, where can you affect change. So that's the intervention that I think will move the ball forward a lot faster than that. Because I know there's good intentions. There's always good intentions. No one will, for the most part, not say they want to see an ideal world, but really the nuts and bolts is inclusive excellence and including everyone and getting everyone on board to work together. That's really been, I think, the success that has been an ingredient that has led to success we had. So we had this great, punch of success at the beginning of 2017, but then my fear was, can we sustain this, right? Can we sustain this? And long story short, 4 years in a row, we've been able to sustain this representative demographic in our biosciences program. And it's been really wonderful, because when you start to really do the hard work at the very beginning, there's a lot of work you got to do to basically set the foundation, and then nurture it. Don't just say, okay, great, mission accomplished. No, by no means. So you have to keep on working at it. But the thing is, you brought more people with you to actually keep it going and keep it growing. And then it's a fortuitous cycle, because then the growing community is like, wow, Utah's a lot more diverse than I thought. This is great. I really like this. So then the next class is like, you know what? Utah was a great surprise. I love it. It's a collaborative community, and the diversity is like, beyond my expectations. I want to do my training here. And then basically the cycle continues. So that's what we've been doing so far. I think that's contributed to our success. But the big gap then is that, it's not enough to get diversity here. You have to continue the nuts and bolts of inclusion to make sure that, the equity work, to make sure that we have people from all groups graduating, getting what they need during their training program, so that they all, in one measure, graduate pretty much at all the same levels. If 70% is the best that Utah can do, because there's going to be some, attrition, but 70% for all groups, not just one group and not the other. Okay, so the inclusion piece has to continue. It's not enough to get diversity here. We win the battle, but we will lose the war if our measures a couple of years from now are saying, oh, we got them here, but you know what? They entrusted us with their training and we're failing them. They're still, the attrition rate is still very high for these specific groups. So it takes from the bottom up and the top down. And I think the intervention is to stay vocal, stay involved. And if you really do care about this, you can do your part. Just don't sideline yourself. Don't be complicit with the status quo if there's still more work to do. Be vocal. Students have great power. Trainees have great power. And basically, because we do have a system, thankfully, that there is accountability built into the system. And you just have to realize how do you toot that horn? How do you make it accountable? I know the medical students did it with the White Coats for Black Lives. And you see how the progress is being made at the top, leadership and all these conversations. How do we address these things that the students have basically put in front of us? There's task force all over different programs, in research and health science programs, that are basically saying, we need to do better. And it's from the grassroots, SACNAS and these task forces for EDI, they're basically organizing themselves, coming together, and also taking, the specifics from their programs and really doing the hard work, the nuts and bolts of saying what is wrong, identifying it, and two, how do we go forward? How do we suggest how to go forward better? And then I can see, and then they're asking, I see some people here from this EDI task force online. And so my shout outs to you guys, but basically they also want to say, well, are we doing this for nothing? Is it just going to be, emailed and then we never hear about it again? No, they're really taking the next step. They're advocating for themselves, saying, we want to talk to the directors, and the directors of the program just saying, yes, let's talk. Let's meet in the middle after you've done your town halls and your surveys. And so you can make us aware of what the problems are. And we really want to work with you to make this program better. because we know there are cracks and leaks in the system. It's not perfect, and we do want to do better. So again, it's the bottom up meeting the top down and meeting in the middle to drive things forward. So that's my long-winded intervention, but you matter, and you have that capacity. Don't ever underestimate it.
Well, thanks. You know, I love how you say that, you know, we all have to work together on this, and then we need to empower the people in the room to work on this. I think as leadership, we have a responsibility to hold each other accountable in a way that we haven't in the past. And if you think about, I'm a faculty member, so I'm evaluated by my faculty division chief every year. And I'm always asked how many publications I've done and how my patients rank my service and what I'm doing in the areas of research. But I'm not asked what I am doing to promote equity and racial justice in my sphere of influence. And I think that's where we need to start. And so there's some bottom-up stuff we can actually, you know, have students be held accountable through a grading system, and making sure that we teach principles of racial justice and equity in classes that are important, that are on the boards, all right? And then that way we know that the content is in front of them. Then in other evaluation systems, like I'll use the medical school example, you know, students are graded on how they see patients. And they've always been graded on how they see patients for, I mean, at least as long as my career has gone. But again, never have racial justice and equity been a part of that evaluation. Think about staff evaluations. We're evaluated by how many hours we work, by what we produce, by what results the programs have. Not evaluated about what we're doing to promote racial justice. And so as you go up, I think at some point you tie these metrics to compensation. And if it is that the chair of the department talks to the division chief, and the division chief is like, I tried, you know, I interviewed one Black applicant and that person didn't come here, the chair of the department can say, well, we are done with honoring intentions. We will honor results. So if you interviewed one Black applicant and that Black applicant didn't come, that means that your job has just started and you need to continue to actively work on this. The most important point that Dr. Ducut-Sigala talks about is that the whole thing is deliberate and intentional. There's no organic change here. So if we want to have diversity and racial justice there, we have to demand it. We have to hold ourselves accountable, and we have to be intentional. It's not going to happen on its own. And, you know, we can realize the other benefits afterwards.
Great, thank you. And when you're not in a position of leadership, how do you advocate for racial equity? And along the same line, how can we effectively help diversify the workplace if we don't have hiring power?
Dr. Ducut, would you like me to go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, so that question, I think, you know, my answer to that question today is basically what I just said. I sort of disagree with the question in that if you're not in a formal position of leadership, you know, that the question suggests you have no power. And I disagree. I disagree for basically the reasons I had just talked about earlier just now, in that leadership, like I said, we, in whatever stage we're in, whether you're a staff, student, faculty, somewhere in between, I'm somewhere in between, right? You have the power of influence. You have the power of influence in whatever stage you're in. And again, you know, that power of influence can start at the grassroots level. And Lord knows how many reformations and revolutions have happened that started at the grassroots level. Think of it that way. So you have the baton of leadership in whatever stage you're in. Recognize that. Okay, look at your peers. Look at what other groups have done. I get a lot of inspiration from the SACNAS people. You know, SACNAS, it's I don't know if many of you know. So SACNAS is a national society that has been around for over 45 years, and it started out trying to build community between Latino, Chicano, and Native American scientists, because there were so few of them. So they said, let's just get together and just have strength in our communities and share experiences and get advice, etc. You know, as we go through STEM. And 45 years later, it has grown to the largest multicultural STEM society in the United States. It's big now, but the thing is, they don't forget that where they started, it was at grassroots, and it's grassroots is where they're going to start change. And they have over 120 something chapters all over the United States, and we have a really vibrant one here. And the chapter we started at the University of Utah, again, same thing, started out by a group of graduate students from these diverse backgrounds who just felt kind of isolated, and they just wanted to get together for community. And they started the ball rolling on a chapter here. And fast forward, they got professional development speakers. They were just basically putting their voice forward to be a little bit more public. And that grew and that rippled to the point of, you know what, let's just bring more diverse speakers here. Let's give scholarships to people of students of color who want to, go into STEM and so forth. And then you have someone like me who's like, well, I think I can help. Why don't you help? Can you help out with the recruiting stuff? Let's showcase the diversity we do have here, because I know they truly care. And they were just natural leaders. So I gave them a platform. I just helped give them a platform to basically make aware of what is here and let them just be their authentic selves. And that's what inclusion is really about. Letting them be their authentic selves and communicating to perspectives. Hey, why should I do my training here in Utah? And they basically said, well, this is why I chose Utah. The diversity we have here, it's growing, it's small, but it's noteworthy. We care about it. And so that basically rippled to the point where we started building this really diverse bioscience class. And it is where it is right now. And so it's like, SACNAS used to be sidelined. Like, oh, guys, can you have a poster at the dinner session? Now they actually give a full out reception. And they were involved in, bringing some of those perspectives back on a second look visit, So they, at the grassroots level, they, as student leaders, really were the secret sauce that affected change in diversity numbers that we see. But it's their cultural onboarding that really just started affecting the culture. And that culture really, I think, resonated well with so many talented students to go, yeah, I can see myself wanting to do my training here. This is a really good place. And a lot of them seem happy here. So that's what I say, don't underestimate your power of leadership at whatever level you're in, because one day you will be those leaders who are now at the top, right? But having perspective and being able to do something at each stage, don't wait until you're like, full professor. Like, no, you can do your part at each stage. And you have that voice to just find it and use it and be vocal and do it, so that it is, I like to say, it's win-win. A lot of us are on the same page of these goals, but make it so it's win-win for everyone. And I'm sure you will find, a lot of partners and allies and people who are just like, this is good. I just want to help and promote and do what is good. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. I will say that, the student activism is very important, and SACNAS is definitely a huge part of that. And I think that there are other student organizations that have made a difference, right? You think of some campus student organizations that have put together resolutions, and they've come to us and we've made changes, and we will continue to do that because we serve students. In some ways, students have a little bit more power than some of our early faculty and some of our staff, because we realize that students are such a big driver of what we do. At the same time, you can take this to the staff level, right? And I think that the majority of the employees at the University of Utah Health, and really in the university as a whole, are considered staff. And so there are lots of things that staff can do to actually make change. Some of them have to do with joining affinity groups. For example, we have a Black faculty and staff affinity group, and there are other groups that are forming where you can join with like-minded people and then get that platform to ask and show leaders the way towards change. Another thing that we found is that as we've worked with individual units in health sciences, we've had some people who don't hire anyone, who have been very effective in influencing chairs and deans in their hiring strategy and in their hiring principles. I mean, but it all comes back to the thing. If we want institutional change, we have to have structural change. If we want structural change, we have to change policy. And changing policy is usually a reaction to certain voices. So if your voice is a staff voice, a faculty voice, a student voice, a in-between voice, as Dr. Ducut-Sigala said, that voice, there is a way to get that voice heard by leaders, especially those of us who work in equity, diversity, and inclusion, like Dr. Cariello, myself, Dr. Ducut-Sigala, and many others. We can elevate your voices to make those changes. And frankly, our best ideas do come from the grassroots. The stuff that we come up with by ourselves isn't always perfect. What makes it good is you guys.
Yeah, that's great. You gave great examples of how you can have influence, even if it feels like you don't really have the authority, you can make a difference. On the flip side, how can leaders, and particularly white leaders, advocate and make meaningful space for their BIPOC staff?
Okay, so this is a hard question. And you're asking two leaders who do not have a primary white identity to answer it. So I will do my best here. The first thing we need to do is to understand that this is not an either or thing. The fact that we're working towards racial justice, the fact that we're trying to provide equity, diversity, and inclusion in our institution doesn't mean that we are going to push out our white colleagues, students, staff, whatever role they might have. It is all about expansion and making us as an institution better. My best decisions are made with my team, not by myself. Okay, and so our best decisions at our institutions are going to be made by our diverse teams. And so I think that's what we need to focus on when we're talking about people who may not see this as a personal mission. But I will tell you, there are many, many, many white leaders who do see it as a personal mission, and we need to support and work with them. But there's something else that we should remember, and I just put this on my email the other day because I was feeling radical. And my email says, nothing about us without us. And I stole it from somebody else who said, nothing about us without us is for us. And so the idea is, if we're seeking racial justice, we need to undo some wrongs of the past. And we're not going to be able to know which wrongs of the past we have to undo without having the voices from those people who represent that community. Now, I got to be very careful here, because if we're talking about the Latinx community, one voice is exactly one voice. I can't speak, not even for all New Yorkers, which is what my Latinx identity is, right? I can't. So it requires multiple voices at leadership tables. So if our white leaders who want to see change, want to make change, look at the table, see who's sitting there, and bring in spaces that you know are your blind spots. I might have a blind spot for women, so I bring in a woman leader to be at that leadership table to make sure that I don't screw it up. I have a blind spot about African Americans. I make sure I bring in somebody from that demographic to help me put visible space in my blind spot. And that will help all of us. But I really do think that there's not very many leaders in this country that don't want to see real racial justice change. I think that there are many leaders who, one in particular who might be moving out of Washington, who really did give a voice to a group that doesn't believe that racial justice is necessary. But that is really a very small voice now. It's been essentially silenced by the electors. And so as we move on, we need to make sure that those who want to see change can make the change with our help. But it is getting involved. And getting involved is not always easy. But our offices are all closed, but our emails are always open, and we will do our best to take and bring your concerns to life.
Thank you, Jose. Dr. Rodriguez, that was awesome. Only a couple of thoughts came to mind I just wanted to add. This is, I guess, maybe some tools that I've learned. And to, when I say, at all stages, we have power to influence, and hopefully that influence will persuade change going forward. And one of the things that I've realized is, how do you make this win-win? How in my eyes it's win-win, but in your eyes is it win-win, right? So it's that conversation you have to say, why is this win-win for the University of Utah? Why is this win-win for our department or our program, et cetera? That we should really go this path, have this goal and work toward it. So there is a multiplicity of data-driven publications have shown that if you have diverse groups, teams working together, they almost always outperform to an appreciable degree, groups that are basically homogenous or the same, right? So okay, that's one reason. So where do we want to be? Are we happy with the status quo, or do we want the University of Utah to continue growing and attract the best people as much as we can? And I think the leadership wants to go the latter. They want to keep growing and getting better. And the other thing is the ego. Appeal to the ego to make this win-win, saying, here's our peer institutions. This is where our peer institutions are, and this is what they've been doing. So either we do the hard work to catch up, or we just basically stay where we're at. So, and I think most leadership will say, no, we want to be on the level, of our peer institutions. We're maybe at the bottom of the list of this group of peer institutions, but we definitely want to rise. So put that as a means of accountability. Say, well, if we want to get there, this is what we got to do. Best practices. But we also do new things that are customized to Utah, because we're Utah. But let's incorporate best practice so we will get there sooner than later. So that's, in a way, some skills to say, how do I make this win-win to persuade you that this is important, and we need to elevate this to this level and invest in institutional support and get people on board at the grassroots as well as the top-down level. And the thing is, it will come down to also money, right? You'll get more training grants, you get more publications. All these things are win-win, okay? And those are measurable kinds of things. So again, it will, and that's part of the accountability package, that how will this be win-win? Well, X, Y, and Z will basically be the measures that we can show for it. So in a way, that's built-in accountability to say, we need to do better. How do we do better? Let's do better, right? And involve everyone at all levels. So.
That is great. Thank you. And I know Dr. Rodriguez is going to have to hop off shortly. And Dr. Ducut-Sigala, you actually kind of touched on my next question is how do you talk to people that have formal leadership about diversifying the workplace? Then you kind of went there. Anything to add, Dr. Rodriguez, before you hop off or anything else?
Well, thank you. I would say that, it's a really important thing to talk about the data, and the data is clear that we will cross the next threshold of excellence as we become more diverse, more racially just, more equitable. So it really is, it's kind of strange because I think there's been this myth that diversity and inclusion and equity are opposites of quality, when all of the evidence say that you can't have quality without equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so once we're going to see these two rise together. So if you're struggling on what the next level is, focus on this EDI work and watch us all rise. It raises all boats. And on that note, thank you so much. You guys continue on.
Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez. It's always a pleasure.
Always.
Great, thank you. I don't know if you had anything else to add about talking to formal leadership, Dr. Ducut-Sigala.
Well, just from my experience the last, 4 years, I'll just share a little bit about my trajectory. And in terms of talking formal leadership, today I am at a point, I was elevated to a position where I actually now have a seat at a table, at a leadership table. And 4 years ago, 2017, I'll just say this, right? So my husband was hired as a biochem professor. He's very talented. It's great. But, like a lot of science couples are like, life partners, it's like you want the life partner who's going to, move with you and their family to also, be happy, right? So we advocate for one another at different stages of our careers. And he's like, well, I want to come to Utah. You guys are great, but make my wife happy, right? So back then they said, okay, Jeanette, I have a science background, PhD, that kind of thing. What do you want to do? And they showed me the spectrum of things that were available to do here in the Salt Lake Valley. Teaching, academic program work, working biotech. I actually got an offer for the job in biotech. So I said to myself, okay, there are opportunities here that I can see myself getting into. Okay, let's go to Utah, right? But I was at a crossroads where I'm like, well, what do I want to do? I've been trained, to do heavy research. Is this what I want to do right now? So I really asked myself, I basically made an Excel spreadsheet of what I like to do, what I don't like to do, my strengths, weaknesses, etc. And now I have 2 young children. So I'm trying to put all that into perspective. And so I took a half-time position doing what I'm doing as a diversity inclusion program manager, because there were some gaps. I always cared about, yes, I came from an upbringing where diversity was always a default, and not the exception. And to tell you the truth, Salt Lake City is the whitest city I've ever lived in, right? And raising my children, my husband and I were like, we want to raise our children where diversity is a default, or at least trending in that direction, right? So after I looked at some demographics, I'm like, you know what? Salt Lake City it's trending in that direction. And the people that we, had gotten to know here said it was a great spot. It's growing. It's a good time to come in, etc. So I said, so we came here, and then everything else, like, my backdrop that I have here. I mean, it's just a beautiful place to live, as many of you know. And it was a hidden gem in many respects. But so basically, I always talk about grassroots because my position, it did not exist prior to me coming to Utah. They said, look, we need help with diversity. If you're interested, we can hire you and see if you can help us with this. And I said, I do care about this. And I think I know the people. I have an idea of the groups that you want to talk to and recruit here, because that was me once upon a time. So, basically merging my scientific background, my cultural background, a lot of things that I cared about, and a lot of injustices I also felt. It's like, I think, okay, we can maybe, let's try to move this forward. So I wrote the job description and I said, well, hire me half-time and let's see what happens, right? And I truly, I was passionate about this and I cared about it deeply and I poured myself into it. And again, I saw what were the resources that we have here, bridge those people together, and people had good intentions, always had good intentions. And now they were willing to throw money at it to say, let's try this new initiative for recruiting. It's going to cost this X, Y, Z, but let's try it. Nothing has worked in the past where they'd thrown money before, but we tried these new things based on best practices from other places. And lo and behold, it worked. We went from 0 to 12 students with underrepresented backgrounds joining our PhD program. We were like, wow, it was beyond my expectations, but there was a lot of input investment made. So it paid off. And again, the question is, can we sustain this, right? Or are we a one-hit wonder? So it's basically, we implemented a lot of inclusive activities that really just brought everyone on board, like I said, from the students, the staff and faculty, to really work together in a very, I think it's in a very, in an optimal setting. And we had a goal of saying, how can we really recruit, from the broad talent pool that's here to our programs? And it's Utah, right? And we have already the collaboration, the collegiality, the beautiful place, and the world-class research baseline as well. So as we, over the years, continue to make the inclusion of the diversity we have as baseline to our recruiting practices, it is really, it is solidified, the kind of classes, the diverse classes we've been able to recruit these last 4 years. So I don't know what's going to happen in the COVID year, but still, it was, I think it's good to know that I had no idea. You can always reinvent yourself to do something that you are always passionate about. Because I'm a scientist, but I reinvented myself in a way, but I brought my scientist hat to this. And also a lot of my personal cultural background to this in order to get the task at hand, hopefully, move the ball forward on it. So I'm pleasantly surprised it has gone this far. So anyways, so the nice thing is that everyone likes to tout these numbers, show the graphs, right? It's great. And now we're actually applying for training grants because we have the pool to serve, and we're applying for training grants that specifically really support the success of students from underrepresented backgrounds, because we know there's that gap in retention. And so the thing is, as my, the grassroots thing I've been involved with, and again, I'm a little louder than I am today than I was in the past about these things. The best advice was given to me, Jeanette, stay vocal so that because they need to hear, the leadership needs to hear what's going on, because they're kind of a step removed oftentimes, right? They're the ivory tower of the ivory tower. They need to hear what's going on, the problems that are going on. So stay vocal. You know what, to my surprise, they said, Jeanette, we want you to be, they've offered me a seat, a place at the table. So I was just like, the biochemistry department first funded my position, pathology hopped back on, and then said, oh, let's put it in the bioscience budget. And now I have a seat at the table as the senior vice president for health sciences research unit. So I've seen this evolution. It's like, wow, get things done at the grassroots level, you get the measures, and people will say, you know what, we want you to have a seat at the table. And so the things I've learned at the grassroots, I can actually now really help connect. So when I said I was at this in-between stage, this is a very in-between stage. I'm neither, a trainee, but I'm neither faculty or, personal leader, but I do whatever it was. I still, the stage I'm in was able to try and bring people with us to really affect change. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I love her quote on leadership. How does it go? Like, wait, hold on. I have it here. Her quote goes like this on leadership. Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And I think that is the best advice. Okay, so, if you do this because it makes us all better, it really does. And people will join on the hop on the bandwagon. You'll be really pleasantly surprised. And then the power of influence, the power of numbers, the power of the community to affect change. But but do your individual part and just do what you can do. To just push it forward. And collectively, it really affects the culture. It really does.
That's great. And I do have a final question, and then I will open up for any other thoughts or questions. We often hear people saying, you know, we look at everybody the same. I don't see color. Why does colorblindness miss the mark?
You know, colorblindness is the, how to say, it's the anti-tool for inclusion. Is that a good way of putting it? You know, if nature, and I always like to draw back from the principles of nature that we've learned, like nature goes, Mother Nature, that is, it trends toward greater diversity, and trending toward greater diversity over time, right? And mutations introduce me, all that kind of stuff. It gives us a robustness that life as we know it on Earth can basically survive, and the next generation will be stronger for it. If Mother Nature intended us to be colorblind, that quality would have dominated, and we would have that as a dominant quality that has led to our ability to survive and proliferate and just thrive here on this planet Earth, right? So I take that and say, you know, to say that, oh, I want to be colorblind, you know, when I'm with regard to people, I feel like I think people in general are well-intentioned, but that tool is missing the point. Because to be colorblind means to say that it's a one-size-fits-all, that you see this lineup of people here, and it's a one-size-fits-all, and whatever they need to basically progress, it's a one-size-fits-all, right? And it's also, you know, what it took for them to get to that place. It's like, well, you miss the richness of the diversity of our experience that actually got us to, you know, to be here. Like if so, you know, I always think about like affirmative action. Is it, you know, people want to get rid of it, people say it's worth it, and so forth. And people who want to get rid of it, I feel like, you know, they take more of a colorblind approach to it. It's like, well, let's just do it all merit based. But not everyone has the same tools and resources at the beginning to get to that point, right? And so I feel like there's a institutional level of colorblindness that is there when people say, no, let's just do it all on merit based. It is merit, but the thing is, what you don't appreciate is what it took to get there. You know, a student, for example, who has a slightly lower GPA, but, you know, they were the first person in their family to go to college, they had to work 40 hours and go to school and all this other stuff, right? To get this point, and maybe they have a GPA that's, you know, in the lower, like 3.2 or something. And then you have this really, truly accelerated person who has a 4.0 plus, and they've done all this great stuff. But, you know, they had a privileged background. They had access to a lot of opportunities, which they took advantage of, which is great. But the thing is, though, can you say that the person who had the 3.2 versus the person who had the 4.0, can one say that the person who has the 4.0 is a better student and probably has more potential, you know, to actually succeed in a PhD program? No, you can't. And I think that's colorblind, because the thing is, you know, you have to say, well, what they're both here, they're applying, they look like, you know, strong students. And you think you have to basically look into their background and say, you know what, this student had so many more challenges in their life that to overcome. The fact that they are here applying to a graduate program, given all these things working against them, it really speaks to their resilience. And that resilience will get them through the PhD, because they've already run through the mill. Now, the student who has a high GPA and has had all these, you know, the accolades, et cetera, and opportunities, they'll probably do fine too. But when they get hit with something that's really, really, you know, hard in their life, what's their resilience factor like? I don't know, right? So the thing is, to be colorblind to say, well, the 4.0 is better than 3.2, that's not, no. You can't, it's not, that's very unfair. And I think it's very narrow and very ignorant of so many things that basically come into play. And so, I know people have good intentions when they say, well, I just want to look at, you know, do it merit-based and so forth, but it's not the whole story. It's a very narrow focus. And that's the status quo oftentimes. Do we stay there, or do we do better? What do we do? Where do we want to go? So that's my take on, and if nature wanted to, if nature intended us to be colorblind, then we would be colorblind. But no, but nature allows us to see, the depth of color and clarity that we have today, and it has helped us thrive, as Homo sapiens. So, anyways, I take that from what is best practice that nature has to show us. So, take that and integrate it into how we basically deal with our systems.